It's an amulet for my village. Rudy? You really think so?
To have a nice long talk about all this later.
A 34-year-old NEET ends up getting killed and gets reborn in another world with the talent for magic. Hello and welcome back to our channel Ice Guy. Today we are going to do a recap of the anime series called Moshkou Tensei. Ep 1, the episode begins and we see a man who is also the main character of this anime at 34 years of age. Our lead was killed in an auto vehicle accident, possibly saving 2 high schoolers. As he dies, he finds himself reborn in a world with magic and swordsmen that weren't named in the first episode. However, when he is reincarnated, he doesn't lose any of his memories or his personality. In some ways, this is a positive thing since it leads him to walk, talk, and read much more quickly than most. Add in his parents, Paul and Zenith, who are well off thanks to Paul being a knight for the village, and it makes it so he doesn't have to work or do anything but entertain himself, which he does mainly by practicing magic, which his mother is ace at. However, once he shows himself far more powerful than any toddler should be, his parents call for a magic tutor, Roxy McGurdia.
Well, you're one to talk, aren't you? In that case, I'll do what I can.
Roxy shows how water magic works on a tree, breaking the trunk. When she asks what Rudius thought, he tells her that his mother loved that tree and might be angry. Roxy rushes to fix the tree. She uses healing magic to reconnect the tree trunk and causes flowers to grow. Rudius tries it. However, he's concerned that using magic without chanting is taboo. He chants but becomes distracted when getting a glimpse of Roxy's underwear. He accidentally shortens the chant, revealing that he can use magic without chanting. Roxy's repair of the tree wasn't good enough. It breaks again. Afraid she might get fired, Rudius struggles to comfort her. But a new problem arises. Rudius remembers that in his past life, he hadn't communicated directly with a person in decades. Episode 2, Rudius spent the mornings practicing magic with Roxy, physical training with Paul in the afternoons, and then spell experimentations by himself in the evenings. Rudius soon becomes an intermediate ranked mage after 4 months of diligence, and his knowledge of the world progressively starts to expand thanks to Roxy's lectures. During their lessons, he learns Roxy is a demon while proceeding to take note of an especially dangerous race of demons called the Superds to never mess with them should he encounter them. After roughly another year, Rudius successfully advances to advanced rank in all branches of magic. Rudius is now celebrating his 5th birthday. In this world, it is customary to celebrate on the 5th and 10th birthday, and finally on the 15th when one is considered an adult. Paul gifts him a real sword and a practice sword.
This is great, Father. Thanks a lot.
For a man must carry a sword in his
A
heart.
botanical encyclopedia from Zenith, and a wand from Roxy. The following day, while practicing swordplay, Paul expresses his worries Rudius might not be interested in learning swordsmanship at all as he was more proficient in magic. In the end, Rudius comforts him by showing his determination to learn the way of the sword. But again, during the middle of his class, Roxy relays her thoughts to Rudius that he could strive to become a knight instead of a mage. While Paul saw in Rudius a talent for magic, Roxy saw in him a passion for the sword. Rudius is concerned over this situation, but before he could give his answer, Roxy abruptly mentions his graduation is coming up very soon, leaving him in disbelief. Roxy had decided his graduation examination would be held outside the house. Rudius is reluctant and nervous about this idea, but Roxy ultimately forces him into riding out with her. As they rode through the village, Rudius is burdened with anxiety when the villagers gaze in their direction. However, soon enough he realizes they are not looking at him but at Roxy, who despite being a demon had made a name for herself. Rudius sensed her trustworthy presence and finally calms down. After an hour they stop at a desolate grassland and Roxy then instructs she was going to cast the water saint level spell Cumulonimbus. After her demonstration, Roxy informs the test that he should attempt the same spell himself to maintain the effects for an hour. Rudius starts to chant the incantation, but for his convenience, he applies scientific methods from his previous world to keep the spell's effects steady for an hour without expending mana. Roxy, taken aback by his feat, ends the examination on the spot and grants him the Water Saint title. The next day, before departing, Roxy gifts Rudius her amulet of the Migard tribe to get him out of trouble when demons were included. As she finally goes on her way to explore the world and hone her magic more, Rudius found the most profound sense of respect for Roxy, remembering all the invaluable knowledge she had given and for taking him to the outside world. Episode 3, Rudius was no longer frightened by the outside world. Venturing outside, greeting the villagers, and exploring the surrounding lands is now routine to him. One day he decides to make his way up a small hill to scout the village layout, but instead, he ends up encountering 3 kids abusing a lone boy covered in mud.
Well, this feels familiar.
Eventually, Rudius steps in and successfully drives the bullies away by flinging magic mud balls and rescues the boy. After washing the filth off the boy, Rudius is surprised to find he had a very pretty face with emerald green hair, and the boy revealed himself to be a half-elf. Later that day when they went to play on the hill Sylph, the boy showed an earnest determination to learn magic from Rudius. Affirming his desire, Rudius begins tutoring him. The sun had gone down when Rudius returns home only to find a vexed Paul waiting for him. Paul had been misinformed by one of the bullies' parents that Rudius had punched their son, and now Paul demands Rudius an apology, refusing his side of the story and eventually ending up striking him. Rudius, annoyed by Paul's stubbornness, proceeds to break his conscience with words, leading to a heavy-hearted Paul apologizing instead. Rudius, now relieved that he was finally willing to listen, explains the full story and goes on to comfort Paul, who was feeling miserable as a parent. Rudius turned 6, his day-to-day life had not changed much and he was still stuck at a level in swordsmanship. Daily magic training with Sylph is now a daily routine and he had made remarkable progress over the year. Now Sylph is eager to learn silent spellcasting like Rudius. To Rudius' surprise, he can pull off silent spellcasting on the first try and his self-notions of being special disappears. But before they could continue, a downpour came and they rush back to the Grey Rat estate in soaked clothes. In the bath, Sylph particularly objects to getting naked, but Rudius, wanting to pick on him, suddenly strips him. To his shock, Sylph was not a boy as he had preconceived, but a girl after all. One day, on Paul's advice, Rudius went to Sylph hoping to reconcile with her, but her reply made him realize he was the barrier all along. He had been treating her differently ever since he found out she was a girl. As a result, Sophie didn't know how to react. Understanding she wanted normalcy, Rudius decided he would treat her like he did before and try his best not to fluster her. Ep 4, Zenith learned she was pregnant. The Grey Rat household was abuzz at the announcement. It was a day of bubbling joy and countless smiles. The problem didn't arise until about a month later. Their maid, Lilia, had discovered that she was pregnant as well. The family was in shock. Paul nervously blurted out the child might be his, and thus was convened an emergency family meeting. Lilia first proposed she would give birth in Fatoa and then raise the baby back in her hometown. However, Zenith immediately rejected the idea since it was physically impossible not only for the mother but also for the newborn. Zenith was grappling with two separate emotions, her fondness for Lilia and her feelings of betrayal. Rudius, not wanting to see his family break apart, decided he would help Lilia to solve the problem. He cleverly came up with a plan that used Lilia as the victim of Paul, evidently Paul being the scapegoat. Rudius turned to his mother and deceitfully crafted a story of Paul making moves on Lilia, and Lilia not able to defy the master, giving in to his desires. Paul was in shock by the development, but Lilia was able to play along. Rudius pushed a bit further and Zenith consequently gave in. She finally announced Lilia would be staying with them as a family.
It would be foolish to ask you to leave, to have a nice long talk about all this later.
Soon after, Zenith gave birth. It was a rough experience, with Lilia in her difficult condition. With the help of a midwife from the village, the birth was a success. To Rudius' joy, a baby girl was born. The relief was short-lived, however, as Lilia went into labor as well. Rudius quickly prepared all the things with magic, and the midwife handled the rest. Another girl was born. Zenith's daughter was named Norn. Lilia's daughter was named Aisha. Rudius turned 7 years old and his sisters were growing quickly. Recently, he had not been able to advance in his swordsmanship at all, still cemented at the beginner level. Surpassing Paul, who was advanced level in all 3 schools and heavily experienced, now seemed nothing more like a pipe dream. One day, while they were in sword practice, Paul brought up the topic of school. Rudius was curious about it, but Paul immediately put off that idea. Instead, he recommended trying out adventuring and venturing into labyrinths. Rudius wanted to give it a shot but assessed it was impossible for him as a peaceful life suited him more. Their conversation was interrupted by Sylphie. Sylphie had been coming to Rudius' house to study. Discerning how rapidly Sylphie was growing, Rudius felt like she'd leave him in the dust in no time. He sighed audibly about having no choice but to go to school or adventure to learn more things. But to Rudius' surprise, Sylphie threw herself at him and obstinately rejected him leaving the village. Seeing her not wanting him to go away, Rudius had creeping thoughts. Maybe he could just stay at the village with Sylphie and enjoy a slow life. Suddenly, a letter arrived. The letter was a wake-up call for Rudius. His respected master was expecting even greater achievements from him, while just now he had been thinking it was fine to stay at the current level forever. Rudius thought he couldn't leave Sylphie behind, and decided he would ask his father to pay for both their fees. However, Paul outrightly shot down his request. Rudius agreed to Paul's explanation of why he couldn't, but asked him to search for a job so that he can earn Sylphie's fees for the university, to which Paul agreed. And that's all for today, guys. If you liked the recap and want more summaries like this, consider subscribing to our channel.